is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hey guys, I'm Dr. Kori Propst, health psychologist and vice president at The Diet Doc. I'm here with my partner again, Dr. Joe Klemczewski, founder of The Diet Doc. Welcome back to the Diet Doc Life Mastery podcast. Today we're talking about creativity, and this is part of our fitness entrepreneurship segment of the podcast. Joe, how you doing?
Doing great. I love this. This is going to be a good one.
We've done, we were talking about this before we hopped on the air, and as part of our fitness entrepreneurship series of blogs, we did a couple on creativity specifically and what it takes in business and how do we cultivate creativity and what difference can it make in entrepreneurship. So it sounds like we're going to dig into that again today.
Yeah, it might sound a little weird mixing fitness entrepreneurship with creativity because people just want to talk about nutrition and training and things like that. But if anybody is in business for themselves, you realize how quickly things change in culture and in the industry you might be in, and how you have to stay on a razor's edge to make sure that you're out in front with everything. And so there are a lot of misconceptions about creativity and where it comes from and all that. So I think we're going to probably roll this into a 2 or 3 part series because there's some really fun stuff.
Yeah, as I think about the course of my life as an entrepreneur, the things that I roll out, the programs that I put out there for individuals to dive into, it's never been just about nutrition every single time and doing this. I'm gonna roll out a 50-day challenge every month. It's never looked like that. I've had to find ways to merge different concepts that I understood would be relevant for the consumers out there and that would really speak to them and help them in a positive way. And so I'm interested in this from your perspective and what you've seen. And we can talk too about, what our owners within the Diet Doc family have done too, because we have some pretty creative people right in our company.
and so, yeah, defining even what creativity is, I would prompt you, anybody listening, to think of who you are attracted to in any business category. It might be the arts, your favorite musician, your favorite author. But even in business, whether it's a business development person you listen to, podcasts you subscribe to, who are the people that you stick around with for the long term? And I guarantee you, it is the person who brings you novel, creative, stimulating content all of the time. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of why it's so critical. And, interestingly, I think this is one of the biggest buzzwords right now, cycling through culture. Started a while ago. People in Silicon Valley, everybody talks about how Silicon Valley is just the bedrock environment for that. And they even microdose LSD and things like that, trying to find the way to stimulate creativity. They're taking Adderall around the clock. Everybody wants creativity. That's just such a thing right now. So yeah, that's why I wanted to do this. I want to dig into the organic side of it all the way to the how to apply it portion.
Well, so you mentioned Silicon Valley and that being kind of a hotbed of creativity. And, as you were saying that, I'm just thinking there's a ton of people in Silicon Valley. And with a ton of people come a ton of ideas. And so I hear idea generation and different beliefs and associations and skill sets and knowledge and all of those converging. And that's what I understand creativity to be. It's not coming up with something that has never ever been thought of before. Like, how does that even happen? But it's a novel idea based on ideas coming together.
Exactly. Which is a great place to start because you're going to be in one of two camps. Some people think that flashes of brilliance just happen. You might think that some sentient being or deity just gives you an answer, gives you an idea. That's very common, and it kind of falls into the everything happens for a reason category and you were just given this inspiration, when in fact, just tons and tons of research and functional MRIs show that that's not how it happens. Right. There are unbelievably complicated networks in your brain that take the information that's already there, and then you can create novel connections. Mm-hmm. But think of it like this. Why didn't somebody 50,000 years ago create the International Space Station? You know, because ideas, as you're saying, have to build on each other. We can only build with what's already inside of our brain. So you've got around 100 billion neurons, almost 100 trillion synaptic connections. That creates an almost infinite amount of space and content for ideas to come together. But you can't have an idea without a building block of something that's already there. And I'm going to explain something, Kori, that will help people understand maybe how it's different from person to person. First of all, like I said, you can't build with something that's not there. So one of the greatest ways to create better ideas is to shove more content in your brain. The people who are listening and reading and watching and manipulating information at a higher level, they have more space to create.
And can I add though, Joe, it's the people though who aren't filling that space with the same type of information. It's people who are willing to step outside of their current way of thinking. Or let's just, quick politics example. If you classify yourself as a Democrat, go learn about Republicanism and the way that they're thinking. It's the people who are willing to step outside of the box and take in information in completely disparate contexts that you're going to be able to come up with really creative ideas. Do you agree with that? Or
the reason that's true is because you're using different parts of your brain, and that's what's critical. We have the neocortex, but memory and things like that, emotion, everything in your brain converges for potential innovation or creativity. There's not a single part of your brain that is not stimulated in some way to create something new. So they've done, again, functional MRIs. You can have somebody in a functional MRI reciting something that they've memorized, and that stimulates a certain part of your brain. You can also then have them do something creative in different ways, emotionally creative, intellectually creative, in different parts of the brain, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the posterior cingulate, even down to a single receptor for dopamine on a single gene in the brain can double somebody's ability to be creative. And so there's that organic thing. You have what you're born with. You have the brain you're born with, but then you can eclipse that potential, maximize that potential by how you're using and developing it. And here's one of the most interesting things I've read recently. So we're constantly curious about how we are evolving. We've talked about how things like the autism spectrum might be a part of protective evolution because of how much stimulus that we're encountering now. Mm-hmm. Well, the white matter of the brain that insulates the gray matter, and think of this, I'm gonna interrupt myself for just a second. Mm-hmm. I mean, our brain size has tripled in the last couple 100,000 years, right? So something made that happen. And you have to wonder, well, what's happening to our brains now? Well, they've discovered that in the white matter, there are more than 1 million channels being created that are almost identical in every person. So just like we started with a brain stem and then you develop, the cerebellum and the reptilian brain, we're not just, the same thing we started with isn't just growing out of necessity in environmental pressure. We're developing new things. Mm-hmm. And what they found is people who have these water channels, and you know how water, creates those ionic channels between neurons. That's how synapses fire. Well, with more than 1 million of these things that they've just discovered, they don't know how they work. They do know that many of them cross hemispheres. So it looks like our brain is evolving to be more integrated, and people who have more cross-hemispheric connections happen to be more intelligent and more creative. Mm. So I wanted to say all of that just to show how important the organic brain is in this process. Because if you know how it works, you know what's there, I think you're going to be way more capable at how to develop habits, skills, create the environment that you need to build on your current creativity.
Well, that's super interesting. And it makes sense from the perspective of just how much information is coming at us all day long. And just the sheer size of our social networks too, and how many people, you know, we're communicating with, and all, I like to call it noise, because a lot of it is, and we have to learn how to filter it out in order to be able to focus and concentrate. But there's a lot more than there ever used to be. And so if we're not evolving in some way, then we devolve, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's going to be so bizarre to think, you know, where the human race, if we survive, is in a couple more thousand years. I mean, we've gone so far. Language was first developed 6,500 years ago or so, and you see where we are. But, you know, the thing that strikes me is that same question we started with, which is, does inspiration or creativity just happen, or can you work to build it? And again, there are different types of creativity. So there's just like there's fluid intelligence, the ability to think on the fly, to critically think, problem solve. And then there's more of the static intelligence, which is how much information can you store and then retrieve and manipulate. And creativity is the same way. So I would encourage people to first think about, if you want to be more creative, think about the style of creativity or the intent that you want that for.
What content do you want to be creative in?
Yeah. Do I want to be creative in my engineering career and build something that's going to destroy the internal combustion engine and all that? Or do I want to be creative in, you know, writing prose? Or do I want to be creative in building my fitness business? So think of what kind of creativity you want, because then I think you're going to find that stimulating that in different ways, stimulating different parts of your brain, the way you manipulate content is going to be important.
So let's go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, Kori, I was going to say, when you think of these concepts and you're just sitting back saying, wow, I want to be more creative, if you've ever had that thought, you know, how do you do that? What would be your first step in fostering that environment? Yeah,
well, it's funny you say, do I actually think I want to be more creative? And I don't actually really ever think that.
I hope you do now.
Well, it's more like, because creativity has such a stigma wrapped around it, and no one thinks they can be creative. Oh, I'm not creative. I hear that all the time. I don't ask myself that question. I ask myself, how can I come up with more novel ideas in this situation? And maybe for people who are listening, that doesn't really sound any different, but it makes a difference for me. And in my mental edge work and my emotional agility work that I'm doing with clients, it's creating imagery is what I have found. It's what I found is connected to creativity for me. It's imagery and analogies, because they really speak to people and they get people to think from new perspectives and in novel ways. So like I have this image with barriers, for example, someone running up against a barrier. We think of a wall, right? And we're just running into it. Can't get over it. I don't know how to do it. In my mind, a creative solution is to do a back bend over that barrier, because it speaks to our need to start being more flexible. That's a very simple example. But no, I don't ask myself that question. I ask myself a different one, which I think is really important for people, and in itself could be an example of creativity, to be able to say, I'm going to use different wording because it hits me differently, and it promotes a different behavior, and it promotes a different emotion. That's creative.
Absolutely. And I was just going to say that is a relational, emotional expression of creativity. So and you're making my point beautifully, in that we often don't think of creativity with business, or I specifically use that example of engineering, like you would never think of an engineer as creative, but they have to be amazingly creative. It's just in a different way. It's a very mechanical thing. They're not waiting for some kind of poem to come to them. They've got specific physics laws and engineering principles they have to abide by, and they're trying to use those to then do something that's never been done, to solve a problem that needs to be solved. And that's the best example of real creativity. Is if you can think of it at that level, then even things like your artistic expressions of creativity will be better, because you're more practiced at taking things that already exist and building them into something new.
Well, you're making me think about, just because I'm a voracious reader. And if you look at I know you are too, if you look at my bookshelves, it's like every single freaking theory on the planet regarding motivation and goal setting and just counseling in general. And so, yeah, I've read all those books. And in any situation with a client, I don't even necessarily now have to deliberately think, what if I approach this from a Gestalt perspective? Like, I just have those ideas in here, and they're all kind of converging at the same time with what this one struggle is with this client. And then I come up with some sort of like I said, an analogy, a solution, a different way of looking at the situation based on, like you said, all of those ideas. But like an engineer, they're in the context of something that needs figuring out. And if they didn't have the knowledge or the ideas, or if they hadn't read it before or done the research or had the education, they'd just be sitting there with blank stare. Like there's
Absolutely.
nothing for them to draw on.
That's the entire point of this first episode on creativity, which is, as you just said, this is the crux. This is the intersecting point of what we think is inspiration, but is really just our uniqueness and our experience. So you've got a bookshelf full of all of these theories and authors that you've read, you've consumed, but nobody who's ever read that entire catalog of information has your brain organically. They don't have your experiences. They don't have everything that goes into what makes you unique. So when you combine all of that content and information, you have an ability to come up with something that is applicably new, but it didn't come out of thin air. It came out of your brain's manipulation of all of that data that's already in there, combined with what makes you you. So that does seem mystical and magical, and it just, and we experience us. Here's something really, really cool.
Yeah.
In a functional MRI, when you have a new idea or a solution that comes to you, for a brief second, a nanosecond, your brain actually slows down dramatically. They call this a brain blink, because it's almost like everything's converging. You're thinking, and then your brain is about ready to create something, and I put creation in quotes, and bam, your brain almost just delivers it to you on a silver platter, and that can feel very spiritual or magical.
The insight moment. That's the aha moment.
Right.
All of us are familiar with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa. Whoa.
So here's a great example. Several years ago when I was working on content for our business, I was being interviewed by Lane Norton and Sohee Lee. And I told those guys, in my next book and something we talk about in our company, I'm coining the term structured flexibility. Doesn't exist in any way in research, literature, whatever, but I'm telling you right now, it's almost a time stamp on this interview date right now. I'm throwing this out there. I'm not copywriting it. I don't own it, but I said, I just want to let you know that this is going to happen, because as soon as somebody sees that in our material, they're going to start using it and stealing it and all of that. I just went to a website yesterday in our industry, and this person is giving this whole mission statement about what they do. And at the very bottom, in bold words, they said, we call this structured flexibility. And so that person was listening to that interview at some point, may have even forgotten about it. It's just in their subconscious. And then at a point in time when they're writing content for their website or mission statement, that phrase pops in and they think, whoa, I made that. That's amazing. That's inspirational.
Maybe, Joe, or maybe they had the concept of structure and they had the concept of flexibility. And just like in your brain during that
Absolutely.
podcast, you came up with it. The same thing happened to them, but they had no clue that you already came up with it.
That can happen.
Everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's everywhere. I can't tell you how many times how long ago was it that how long have I been talking about alignment? Okay, just listen to a podcast. Someone had created an acronym for align. All right. How long have I been talking about emotional agility? There's a book called Emotional Agility. I've read it now, but I hadn't read it before, and I'd been using that term for a long time.
And like I said, yeah, I mean, that totally happens. I remember even, Charles Darwin experienced this where he's given credit with somebody else and both coming up with the concept of evolution. But I would argue that happens less than you think. That, as cultural conversation moves forward and we're talking about the same things, absolutely parallel ideas happen at the same time. Right. But a lot of times you just hear that phrase somewhere and it sticks. But anyway, my main point to this, and we'll wrap up this whole conversation on this point, is that you have the ability to be creative, even if you think you're not. It's a process that goes through your brain, uniquely through everybody's brain. Uniquely different types of intelligence and creativity are available to everybody. And we're going to talk about that over the next 1 or 2 episodes about how to create those environments, how to stimulate creativity, how to measurably increase your ability to create novelty. And we'll kind of wrap up even with what that means. Why do that? What's the big deal?
And maybe we can talk about some very specific examples within the fitness entrepreneurship space of creativity as well. That would be
Absolutely. Great. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kori, for diving into this one with me. I think it's going to be fun whenever we can talk about intellect and business and creativity and fitness all in one nice little neat package. It's going to be fun. So thank you guys for watching and listening, and we look forward to more with you. So just stay with us for this whole series.
Thanks, guys.